Hello, my name is Abraham Kline, and at the time of this recording, we're within hours of the 18th anniversary of what many Americans remember as the greatest attack, largest attack on American soil in its history. Um, uh, 9/11, as we often refer to it, the terrorist attacks that occurred on Tuesday, September 11th. And I say many Americans remember because, truth is, there are many Americans today who do not remember the terrorist attacks on that day because they weren't alive yet. In fact, where I work, known as Evergreen After School Clubs, um, I realized that every child that I was working with, and I'm talking high school kids, or most of the ones I work with are middle school kids, but every one of them not only were not born before, um, most of them were born 3 or 4 years after 9/11. And so these are kids who are very much not familiar with it, with the story. And, of course, that's what happens with time. Eventually, um, you know, I'm sure there was a time when people would talk about their remembrance of the December 7th attacks. I don't remember the December 7th attacks of 1941 because, well, I wasn't born yet. And so now I've officially become one of those old people who talk to the kids who are younger and talk about my account. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about um, my account of the 9/11 attacks. Again, it's been 18 years since it's happened, and meaning that anybody that would have been born on that day is now an adult. So, yeah, but regardless of how long ago it was, for me and pretty much anybody I talked to who lived during that time, it's still pretty fresh. It's something that even 18 years later, we have a hard time getting over because it really left an imprint on our lives. I think especially for us who were children at the time, it left a very big imprint in our lives. You know, we were just children. We never knew really much about terrorist attacks or terrorism or having to worry about, attacks in our country. We never really thought about things like that. And so we always felt pretty much safe. And for that to happen really disrupted our lives. And after that for many years, that's all we thought about was terrorism and is there going to be another terrorist attack? Could it happen again? And so, again, it left a very indelible um, impact on our lives. But going back to that time, again, it was September 11th, Tuesday, and I woke up that morning, as any other day, and it was actually, I believe it was my first year going to school at my church's Christian school. I went to Altman Baptist Academy, graduated from Altman Baptist Academy. But this was my first year. I was in fourth grade, and they held me back a year because that's what they did back in that time. When you went from homeschooled to Christian school, they held you back a year for some reason. And so I was in fourth grade. I was 10 years old. And I remember getting up that morning, and as everybody I've ever heard the story from, it was a beautiful morning, absolutely beautiful morning. And I remember, getting up, and it's amazing to think that while I was waiting at the bus stop that morning, there were people hijacking planes while I was waiting at a bus, and while I was waiting for the bus to come. And we were all going about our lives as usual. I was, again, when you talk about terrorist attacks, I was only 2 when the bombings happened in the World Trade Center in '93. I didn't even know anything about it. I never even heard about it till after this. So the whole idea of a terrorist attack was something that I didn't know anything about. It was something that was just completely foreign to me. And so, yeah, again, got on the bus that morning. We went to school. It was just a regular day. Of course, I was new to the school, and so I was, I think it was probably maybe our second week, and so it was all very new to me. I was very scared about the whole new experience of going to a school with other kids instead of being homeschooled. And I don't really remember Bible class that morning. That's the way it was set up. It was Bible class, and then either I believe it was Spanish, not Spanish, English, not English, science, and or history. Because we would do after pastor's class, we would then go to Mrs. Appiok's class, and she did two subjects. So we'd either do the one first and then the other second, or vice versa. And so we were in class, and I believe it was at the end of Bible class, and Mrs. Appiok comes rushing in. I believe it was just after fruit break. Fruit break was a 15-minute break between those two classes. And she comes in, and she's telling us how that the Pittsburgh airport is an absolute chaos. Mrs. Appiok, Pastor Andy, as we called her husband, Andy Appiok, was out and about. He was like a salesman at the time. And so, he probably went to the airport a lot, traveled here and there a lot. And so he was pretty familiar with what was going on, And so he had called Mrs. Appiok and told her that the Pittsburgh airport was in absolute chaos because of something going on. Remember, this was around 10:30. At this point, I believe the attacks had already happened. The second wall had already fallen down, and so all of this happened. All of it happened, and us kids who just went to a little Christian school in Alton, Pennsylvania, all this happened, and we were completely unaware. Now it's amazing to think if this had happened today in the days of social media, it could have happened, and we would have probably known about it before we even went to school, because it would have just gotten out. Back then, though, we were kids. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have tablets. We didn't even have internet. My house didn't even have internet at the time. I don't think we got internet until probably 10 years later. So yeah, we had, unless somebody came out extra with a paper, we weren't going to find out about it. And so Mrs. Appiok came in. She was talking about Pittsburgh airport being in chaos. I didn't know what that meant. And so that's basically all we knew, is that there was just a bunch of, fuss going on. We didn't know that there had been any attacks. We didn't know that there had been planes run into buildings, or, probably about 2 hours away from us, that there had been a plane that went down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. We didn't know. And so we went through our classes as we normally did, just kind of wondering what she was talking about and what was going on. And then lunch came. And Mrs. Brady was her name. She came in, and she was crying. And she was saying that something had happened, that there had been an attack on our country, which scared the living daylights out of me, being 10 years old, and hearing a lot about World War II and things like that. And I thought, oh no, an attack. And so, we heard about, planes going into buildings and things like that, and the Pentagon was attacked. And so then I believe Pastor came in. He either came to the school, or he called and said that we were going to go home early because of these attacks. And so after, we were kind of excited because we were getting out of school early. But at the same time, we were still all in absolute shock of what was going on. After that, we went to my grandma's house. My mother picked me up. She took me to my grandma's house, and she had TV. And so we turned it on, and we saw, I saw footage of burning buildings and Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and the Pentagon. And it was, I don't know, I'm not sure I completely realized the magnitude of what was going on. I remember my mom saying New York looks like a third world country, because these people were just covered in soot and the debris of the buildings having fallen down. And at that point, I didn't know, I didn't know that there were people inside the buildings. I just knew that the planes had crashed into the buildings, that the buildings had fallen. But I didn't know that there were people trapped under the buildings. I mean, so many stories would come out later that we at that point had absolutely no idea about. And then, of course, President Bush would come on and he would talk about that night about these attacks that had happened and how that we were going to take swift action to it and things like that. And then I remember going. We came home eventually, and I went over to my neighbor's house. And I remember one of my friends, Joe Flory, he was sort of sitting at the computer desk at their house, and he said, "If I'm old enough and this war's still going on, I'm eventually going to join the military." He did eventually join the military, and was in the military. Went to Iraq, and I believe he went to Iraq. Wasn't Afghanistan, I don't believe, for 2 tours, and yeah. So those are my memories from 9/11, and it's interesting to think that it was 18 years ago, just 10 years old, and just so much from the aftermath. Again, really, really, really affected our lives. I remember afterwards there was a lot of patriotism. I know a lot of the documentaries that come out talk about the hate that transpired afterwards, about how people would demonize Muslims and things like that. I don't remember any of that. I don't recall any of that. I do remember, however, a unity. And it wasn't just white Americans. It wasn't just black Americans. It wasn't just Christian Americans. It was all Americans. We all came together, not as a religion, not as a race, but we came together as Americans. And unfortunately, that's a controversial statement today, to say that we would come together as Americans, because for some reason when you say that, people think there's an ulterior statement to that, that somehow you're talking about, oh, you mean Christians, oh, you mean white people, you mean this group or that group, or Republicans or Democrats or whatever. But 18 years ago, that's not what it meant. Whatever people mean by it today, that's not what it meant 18 years ago. 18 years ago, when people said American, it meant all of us. All of us together, one nation together, in unity against all forces, domestic and foreign. And I kind of miss those days. And I remember, it was just a few months later, I remember sort of that initial hype sort of dying down, and it kind of went back to normal again. And I remember missing it, because despite the tragedy of what happened, the aftermath, the initial aftermath, did have it did create some good things. And of course, I would never wish that, people had died. I'm not happy that those people died. And I'm sure there were Muslims that were mistreated and all that. But I would say, as a whole, as a complete, togetherness, it was a great time of unity and love and togetherness. And I wish we could have that togetherness again. I don't want another attack like that again. But I do wish we could have that togetherness again. But yeah, that's my account. I know this video's gone a little bit long, but yeah, that's my story, my remembrance of that time, and I hope this has been informative, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching.